Imagine you're walking through a forest at night. You see someone standing between the trees. They have two eyes, a nose, a mouth. They look human. You take another step closer, and then you realize something. This person isn't from your time. They're from 100,000 years ago. Would you recognize them? Or would something about their face immediately tell you, this person doesn't belong here? Most people imagine prehistoric humans as dirty cavemen with enormous brows, wild hair, and almost animal-like faces, because 100,000 years ago, humans were already human. And the truth about what they looked like is much stranger than the caveman you've seen in movies. But before we get to that mystery, we need to understand one thing. What exactly was a human 100,000 years ago? Homo sapiens were already living in Africa and other parts of the world. They weren't half human. They weren't animals slowly waiting to become us. They were members of our own species. Their technology was different. Their environment was different. Their daily lives were completely different. But biologically, they were human. Their skulls already had many features we would recognize today. A relatively high forehead, a rounded brain case, a comparatively smaller face, and a human-like jaw and chin. But there were differences too. Some populations were more robust. Their faces could be stronger. Their bodies could be more muscular. And their physical appearance varied depending on where they lived. Think about your own life. You wake up, you walk to your car, you sit at a desk, you order food, you use an elevator. Now remove all of that. No cars, no roads, no supermarkets, no modern medicine, no heating, no air conditioning. For someone living 100,000 years ago, their body was their survival equipment. They walked, they carried, they hunted, they gathered, they climbed, they ran. And they did it because they had to. But if their bodies were so different from austerity, what would their faces actually look like? Let's start with the feature we notice first. The face. Forget the cartoon caveman. A human living 100,000 years ago would not necessarily look like a completely different species. At first glance, they could look surprisingly familiar. Two eyes, a human nose, human lips, human ears, human hair. But look closer. Some early Homo sapiens populations had more robust facial structures. The brow region could be more pronounced. The jaw could appear stronger. The overall face could look heavier than the average modern face. But here's where things become complicated. There wasn't one single type of human living 100,000 years ago. There wasn't one face. There wasn't one body. Human populations were already diverse. Imagine asking, what do Americans look like? You wouldn't expect one answer. The same problem exists when we ask what humans looked like 100,000 years ago. Different populations lived in different environments. They had different genetic histories, and over many generations, those differences could influence appearance. So when you see an artist's reconstruction of a prehistoric human, you're not looking at the human from 100,000 years ago. You're looking at one possible individual based on available evidence. The word caveman creates a very specific image. A dirty man, animal skin, a giant club, living inside a cave. But real prehistoric humans were much more complicated. They made tools, they controlled fire, they processed food, they hunted, they gathered plants, they created shelters, and most importantly, they lived in social groups. Their survival depended on cooperation. Someone had to find food, someone had to process it, someone had to care for children. Someone had to watch for danger. Someone had to maintain the fire. Their lives were difficult, but difficult doesn't mean unintelligent. Their tools may look simple compared with modern technology, but a stone tool represents planning. You have to choose the right stone. You have to understand how it will break. You have to shape it into something useful. And then you have to know what to use it for. That's not random behavior. That's technology. Their clothing is harder to reconstruct. Organic materials such as skin, fiber, and wood usually don't survive nearly as well as stone and bone. So scientists have less direct evidence for exactly what many individuals wore. But depending on the environment, humans could use animal skins and other natural materials for protection. And that's something we have to remember throughout this entire story. Scientists don't have photographs. They have clues, bones, teeth, tools, DNA, ancient environments, and fragments of evidence. And one of the biggest mysteries isn't hidden in their bones at all. It's hidden in the features that usually disappear first. What color was their skin? What color was their hair? What color were their eyes? These questions sound simple, but they're surprisingly difficult to answer for individual people who lived 100,000 years ago. Why? Because skin doesn't usually survive for 100,000 years. Hair doesn't either. Soft tissue disappears. Bones can survive. Stone tools can survive. But the face you would see in a mirror? Usually gone. Ancient DNA can sometimes provide clues about biological traits, including aspects of pigmentation. But DNA isn't a photograph. Scientists can't simply take an ancient genome, press a button, and get a perfect picture of that person's face. Human appearance is influenced by many genes, and ancient DNA itself can be incomplete or damaged. So when you see a reconstruction online claiming, "This is exactly what a human looked like 100,000 years ago," there's an important distinction. It's not a photograph. It's an interpretation based on evidence. Some parts can be reconstructed with greater confidence. Others are educated estimates, and some details may remain unknown forever. But there's an even bigger mistake we make when imagining these people. We assume they all looked the same. Imagine 3 humans living 100,000 years ago. One in Africa, another thousands of miles away, another living in a very different climate. Would they look identical? Humans were already moving across different environments. Populations could become separated. They could encounter new environments. And over generations, genetic differences could accumulate. This is why the question, "What did humans look like 100,000 years ago?" doesn't have one simple answer. There wasn't one face. There wasn't one skin tone. There wasn't one hairstyle. There wasn't one body type. There were populations, and those populations were already changing. But here's the fascinating part. Even with all those differences, if you could somehow bring one of these people into the modern world, they might not immediately look like an alien. They might look human. Maybe unusually robust. Maybe unfamiliar in certain details. What would shock them about us? Imagine waking up tomorrow, and every modern thing has disappeared. No skyscrapers, no highways, no airplanes, no phones, no electricity, no artificial lights, no constant traffic. Instead, wind, fire, animals, footsteps, voices, darkness. A human from 100,000 years ago might recognize your face, but they wouldn't recognize your world. And you might recognize their face, but you probably wouldn't survive very long in their environment without modern tools. That's the paradox. Biologically, the distance between us isn't as enormous as we imagine. But culturally, the distance is almost impossible to comprehend. The person standing around that ancient fire wasn't waiting to become human. They already were. They experienced fear. They experienced hunger. They got injured. They became sick. They depended on other people. They raised children. They experienced loss. They watched the night sky. And they wondered about the world around them, just like humans do now. So after everything we've learned, we can finally answer the question we started with. What did humans really look like 100,000 years ago? The honest answer is, they probably looked much more human than we imagine. They had human faces, human hands, human eyes, human bodies. But some populations could have had more robust physical features than many people today. Their appearance varied across geography and ancestry, and many details remain uncertain. So the scientifically responsible answer isn't, "This is exactly what they looked like." It's, "This is what the evidence allows us to reconstruct." And that distinction matters, because the more we study our ancestors, the less they look like monsters from another world, and the more they look like us. 100,000 years ago, someone could have sat beside a fire. They could have looked into the darkness. They could have watched their children sleeping. They could have wondered what tomorrow would bring. They didn't know about cities. Sometimes, the most unsettling face in history is the one that looks almost exactly like ours.